sure it'll be over around yeah, it's going to be short.
Please take a seat. We'll be starting. Hello, please have a seat. We'll be starting momentarily. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Please take your seats. This is room 1. We're about to begin the panel. We're about to begin the panel on human rights advocacy in the international arena. We're delighted that to present this panel, we have Paula Schriefer, Director of Advocacy for Freedom House. She's doing a lot of work across the street at the UN Human Rights Council with victims from around the world. And she's taken time to share with you some of her experience and expertise developed working around the world on these issues. Without further ado, Paula Schriefer.
Great, thanks so much, Hillel. UN Watch has been a terrific partner, and for those organizations like Freedom House that don't actually have offices here in Geneva, I would say my first piece of advice is to actually befriend local Geneva-based groups who can help you out when you need information of what's going on behind the scenes, and sometimes you get stuck at the badge office because you don't have the right letter or so on. Anyway, partner with groups here. It makes a big difference. We, I think, are going to have a PowerPoint to accompany this, but I'm going to go ahead and get started since we're already a little bit behind. I'm going to focus mainly on doing advocacy at the Council itself as opposed to the other human rights mechanisms of the UN system, because that's mainly what our efforts at Freedom House are focused on. We're here? Yep. Great. And let me just coordinate here. To start off, I think in looking at advocacy at the Human Rights Council, first and foremost, you need to remember that, in fact, the Human Rights Council itself is a political body. For those who had done work at the Commission and remember what was involved in reforming the Commission and developing the Council, you'll remember that the Council is slightly smaller than the old Commission. It's made up of 47 member states. But like most UN bodies, most UN institutions, those seats are divided up on a regional basis. As you can see from the slide here, the way the Council is divided up is that the Africa group gets 13 seats, the Asia group gets 13 seats, Eastern Europe gets 6, Latin American, Caribbean get 8, Western Europe and other get 7. Certainly this makes sense in regards to the overall proportion of the UN. Unfortunately, in regards to human rights specifically, it's a little problematic because the 2 regions of the world that get the largest number of seats at the Council also happen to be the 2 regions of the world that probably have the most problematic human rights records and governments that aren't necessarily interested in promoting human rights. Well, what is this? How does it work? How do these governments, how do these states get elected to the Council? There are actually elections for the Human Rights Council. Typically, they take place in May, and on an annual basis, 1/3 of the council members are elected by the overall General Assembly. Now, countries have to get an absolute majority of votes by the GA. It means that they essentially need 97 votes to get on. It is technically a secret ballot. States aren't supposed to know who is voting for them and who's not voting for them. But there aren't really any specific criteria that are put in place for members to sit on the council. There were some general guidelines that were given out to the UNGA states in terms of their voting, and essentially they are supposed to take into account the candidates' quote, contribution to the promotion of and protection of human rights and their voluntary pledges and commitments made thereto when electing council members. You can see that there. So what has this resulted in? How have the council elections gone so far? I can say that in fact the composition of the council is a little bit better than it was in the old commission days, meaning that there aren't as many countries who are very, very rights-abusing countries and opposed to international norms of human rights. I can also say that at least in terms of how Freedom House evaluates countries, we have this big broad category of free, partly free and not free countries. The good news is that in fact most of the council members fall into our free category. The second largest group are countries that fall into that sort of in-between category, and it's actually a relatively small number of countries who've gotten elected that fall into our lowest category of not free countries. Again, looking back towards the Commission, if you look at this chart, you can see back in 2005, that was the last year of the Human Rights Commission. Compare it to what the membership has been like since the four elections that have been held since the Council started. And it's actually a little bit better under the Council, and it's been pretty much consistent in regards to those levels being about the same. However, one thing to note, unfortunately, is that just because countries respect human rights within their own borders does not necessarily mean that they are going to carry that mandate through when it comes to voting at the Council. I think this means that in terms of advocacy efforts for NGOs, you not only have to look at the elections and try to influence countries with positive human rights records to get elected, but you also have to actually look at the voting records of countries, both at the GA and if they've sat on the Council before, obviously, their past Council records. I just want to also note that even of those 8 countries that have pretty terrible human rights records, unfortunately, the reality is that these countries easily get elected to the Council. And so this means NGOs have a lot of work to do in terms of advocating on behalf of competitive slates within the regional groups and really trying to pressure countries that even though there might be a clean slate, for instance, there are only 4 seats open in Asia, that other countries should not necessarily vote for candidates running for those seats, even if there are the same number of candidates as there are seats. And so you'll see at the last year's council elections, China actually got 167 votes. There are only 192 UN members. This means a very, very small number of countries ultimately decided that China didn't have a human rights record that was good enough to be sitting on the council. Coincidentally, that's the exact same number of votes that the United States received when it got elected to the council last year. Also, I should point out, under a clean slate that was run by the Western Europe and other group. And even a country like Saudi Arabia, which sits at the very, very bottom of Freedom House's ranking scale for political rights and civil liberties, which has never endorsed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, very easily got elected with 154 votes. So, Getting good countries with solid human rights records is really important on the Council because, as I said, it's a political body and basically it's up to those states to determine how the Council is going to run. Well, how do they do that? What are the things that they can focus on? I would say the most powerful mechanism that's open to countries, obviously, is the calling of special sessions or the passage of resolutions on particular either thematic issues or on country-specific issues. NGOs obviously have a big role to play in terms of encouraging governments to take up issues at the Council, either in the terms of a resolution or calling a special session, which often results in a resolution. However, one really has to be careful in doing so and thinking about whether or not it's an issue that can get passage at the Council. Keep in mind that only 16 countries are needed to call for a special session. However, if you really want to absolutely guarantee passage of a resolution, you should have 24 countries lined up to vote for it. The way resolutions are passed is through a plurality, so it only means that more countries need to vote yes on a resolution than vote no. Countries that abstain, those votes aren't counted one way or the other. So in fact, a resolution could pass with a smaller number of votes. But in other words, to guarantee passage, you would have to have those 24 lined up. The biggest risk is not necessarily that a good resolution won't get passed. The bigger risk is that a good resolution can be turned into a problematic resolution, which then in turn gets passed. And so we call it the hijacking of resolutions. And for anybody who followed the Council last year, a perfect example of this was the resolution that was passed on Sri Lanka. And here was a case where a number of governments, following the end of the civil war, there were tens of thousands of civilian casualties, there were hundreds of thousands of people who were being held in camps and internally displaced. Obviously, there was fault on both sides, but the Sri Lankan government had a particular responsibility to try to limit that. And so there was a special session called to try to call on Sri Lanka to take a positive role to allow in humanitarian assistance, to allow in journalists. And unfortunately, that resolution ended up being replaced with the resolution that Sri Lanka itself was in favor of, which basically just congratulated the government on concluding the civil conflict, and it, of course, asserted the ultimate sovereignty of states and how important that was. So it was an example where a good idea ended up getting perverted into something that was not the result that was called for, and largely it's because the states who put forward that special session didn't really have the votes lined up going into it. So one really does have to be very careful about that. What have been the results so far in terms of resolutions that the Human Rights Council has actually passed? Well, Freedom House puts out a report card almost on an annual basis, not quite annually, but we just put one out this past fall, and we looked back at the last couple of years at the Council, and frankly we use heavily the resources that UN Watch and some other organizations produce analyzing the resolutions. And so far it's not been, in our view, a particularly strong showing on the part of the Council. Very, very few resolutions have come out that have condemned the actions of specific states. In fact, only 5 states have actually received condemning resolutions by the Council since it started. Those include countries that don't have a lot of political allies at the Council, particularly Burma and North Korea, or DPRK. They were also able to pass resolutions on DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Somalia, and of course a number of resolutions continue to be passed every year on Israel. In fact, more than half, almost 60% of the condemnatory resolutions have specifically been focused on condemning Israel's actions. Certainly, I think there's some validity and justification to some focus on Israel, particularly since the period of the Council has seen several conflicts, that makes somewhat of a sense, but it's certainly out of proportion given the human rights abuses that are taking part in the rest of the world. And in fact, if you look at the 8 or 9 countries that receive the absolute lowest rankings in Freedom House's annual survey of political rights and civil liberties, you'll find that almost none of them have been condemned or had any action taken on them by the Council. These include countries like Belarus, like Chad, China, Cuba, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Laos, Libya, Uzbekistan, Zimbabwe, etc. So nothing has been done really to call out any of those countries which engage in systematic and ongoing abuses of their own populations. Well, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, the composition of the Council really isn't that bad. If you look at the list of the 47 member states, it's quite a few. A vast majority are what we consider electoral democracies. Most of them are in fact free countries, and the vast majority are either free and partly free. So what does this mean in terms of how these countries are voting on specific resolution, and what does it mean for a civil society organization in terms of their advocacy efforts? Well, it means that there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to be monitoring the voting patterns of states and to be putting pressure on those states. A number of key resolutions that we feel either should or should not have been passed have done so with really a shocking number of votes by countries that otherwise have pretty strong human rights records at home, but it seems that when they come to Geneva, they forget about that and they're unwilling to kind of further those rights at the Council. So resolutions like the annual defamation of religions resolution, which has been put forward every single year since 1999 by Pakistan, continues to pass annually at the Council. We expect that there will be another resolution this year. For organizations who don't know what that is, it's basically an attempt to say that people cannot engage in any kind of expression, whether through speech, whether through the internet, whether through print, that any one person or religion finds offensive. And the idea is that religions themselves cannot be subject to criticism. So it's a concept that most within the freedom of expression community, certainly Freedom House and a number of other groups here, have been very opposed to these efforts, and yet these resolutions have passed with relative ease. Last year's vote passed by a vote of 23 yes, only 11 no votes, with 13 abstentions. Of those countries that voted in favor, 6 of those were electoral democracies, either in our free or partly free category, and 12 of the countries that chose to abstain, meaning that their vote was essentially tossed aside, are from countries with quite good human rights records and even good records on free expression. What it's showing is that, like any political body, there are political considerations that go into play when countries are voting on these issues. And it means that our job as civil society is to first of all remind these countries that we're watching them, that we know how they're voting, and to try to inform their voting and influence their voting. When I talk about those 12, abstention countries, I mean these include countries like South Korea, Argentina, Japan, countries that absolutely should be in favor of free expression, and yet on this particular vote they've shown themselves unwilling to take a political stand and to use any of their political capital on this particular issue. Likewise, the Sri Lanka vote that I mentioned a minute ago, it also overwhelmingly passed 29-12 with only 6 abstentions. 12 electoral democracies, countries that fit into our free and high, partly free categories, actually ended up voting in favor of that resolution. Now, one of the few successes of last year, because I don't want to be entirely pessimistic, the Council can work when a tremendous amount of advocacy and political capital is put into it. And one example of that is the Sudan resolution that did ended up passing last year, although just barely. Now, this was a resolution to extend the mandate of the special procedure focused specifically on Sudan, obviously one of the most critical human rights situation on the globe. There was tremendous opposition to extend the mandate, particularly from the Africa group of countries, and yet nonetheless, because of the advocacy efforts that were done, because of the capital-to-capital political outreach that was done, the African countries did not end up voting as a group on this issue, and several key countries within even that region ended up voting in favor of a resolution that would extend a new mandate into Sudan. And that was really, really critical, and it shows that with a huge amount of work, there can be successes at the Council, and the Council can do a right thing. So that mandate was extended, and a number of other countries actually ended up abstaining on that vote rather than voting no. So that's the kind of efforts that NGOs can be engaged in together with states that share their views on particular issues. Another huge opportunity for advocacy at the Council relates to the new process, this new review process, the Universal Periodic Review. In a nutshell, the Universal Periodic Review was set up together with the Council as a mechanism by which every single member, all 192 member states of the UN, would have to undergo a review of their human rights record within a certain amount of time. And basically the way it was set up is that this review would take place every 4 years. It's, I think, an idea with actually tremendous merit, because I think it's really important that all countries, whether they have a better human rights record, whether they have a worse human rights record, that all of these countries are subject to review. Every country in the world has human rights problems, and this provides a tremendous opportunity for civil society to raise the issues in their country and to engage in this process. We're not entirely thrilled with the way the process is set up, although again I think it's an important opportunity. Essentially how it works is first there's a documentation period whereby the states themselves submit half the documentation that's reviewed during the Universal Periodic Review process, so they get to submit a 20-page report. And in addition, there are two other reports, compilation reports, that are put forward. One of those is a compilation of reports that are submitted by what are called stakeholders. This can be pretty much almost any organization that's not part of the UN system, so non-governmental and civil society organizations. And moreover, these groups did not have to maintain consultative status with ECOSOC. So even groups who don't have special or general consultative status or roster status can actually submit 5-page reports that can be included in this compilation document that the OHCHR puts together. Then in addition, the OHCHR puts together its own compilation document that looks at all of the official reports that are produced by the special procedures, by treaty bodies. They sort of prioritize this information. Once all of this is pulled together, the states basically participate in an interactive dialogue with other member states that sit on the Council. Here's the part where we think that there could be a much greater role for independent expertise. Not necessarily civil society participation, although that's something we would be in favor of, but certainly at a minimum some kind of independent expertise so it's not purely a peer review process. As it's set up now, this interactive dialogue is a peer review process. Once that dialogue takes place, a report is drawn up that eventually it becomes the outcome document. That document is then approved at the next regular session of the Human Rights Council. That document typically includes all of the recommendations that states put forward during the interactive dialogue, although one other part of the process that we're not crazy about is states can basically decide which of those recommendations it's going to accept and which of those it basically doesn't like and isn't pledging to make any improvement upon over the next 4 years until the next time it's reviewed. So just to sum up things that we like about it, we like the overall concept. We think it's important that all countries, regardless of their human rights record, undergo this scrutiny. It provides a tremendous advocacy opportunity, although I would say, unfortunately, that the advocacy opportunities are greater in regards to countries that actually have a pretty decent human rights record. And if you look at how the UPR has taken place, those countries that kind of get the free or partly free rating by Freedom House have really been quite open to the process. They've engaged with NGOs leading up to the UPR. They've been relatively honest about their human rights record and have engaged in the process as it was intended. In addition, there are two other important aspects. All of these reports that are being submitted by the civil society organizations, by stakeholders, every one of those reports is actually archived and maintained on the website of the OHCHR. So it's a tremendous library of human rights information on these countries. And if you go on that website, you can basically read every single report that was submitted by every organization in addition to the compilation reports and the state reports that were put forward. That's been critical. The other thing to note is that there's been a battle over whether or not the UPR sessions would be webcast so that people who don't have the ability to come here to Geneva during the UPR session can actually not only watch the dialogue that's taking place, but if they're tech savvy enough, they can actually make videos of that, and they can use that as an advocacy tool to basically demonstrate what the state under review is saying about its own human rights record, and then of course comparing that to what the actual human rights record is based on the documentation of other experts. The minuses, again, is that it's a peer process, and just like with the resolutions, a lot of countries are not willing simply to criticize other countries' human rights records. Moreover, some of the countries with really, really bad human rights records use this as an opportunity to line up all of their allies on the Council to waste the interactive dialogue period with a bunch of very nonsensical praising of one another's human rights records, and often even using some of that time to criticize countries that that country doesn't like. So it ends up being a little bit of a theatrical performance. Again, you can use that as an NGO by taping this and exploiting and showing how this country is sort of perverting this particular process. The other problem is, of course, it's very hard within 5 pages to really get into the human rights situation in a country. And that really requires NGOs to think strategically and to talk to other NGOs and make sure that all of the major human rights issues in a particular country are being covered by different stakeholders. When Freedom House has submitted reports, we've typically only focused on between 2 and 3 major human rights issues in a country. That's really all that 5-page report actually affords you. But what we've tried to do is talk to other groups and make sure that other major human rights issues are being covered well by another organization. So there is some sort of tactical thinking that can go into play in determining what you're going to be submitting in those reports. Finally, the last thing that I would focus on is a potential downside of the UPR. For those countries who have been very resistant to any country-specific scrutiny at the Human Rights Council, they are using this new UPR process as an excuse to say that we should then eliminate country-specific resolutions or country-specific special procedures like the special rapporteurs. Luckily, they haven't won that battle yet, but it is an ongoing argument that's being made because all of the countries are being looked at. They're arguing there's no need for this special scrutiny of certain countries, which we think is a problem. That then leads me to what I think of as sort of, as I said, the jewels of the Council, the parts of the Council that I think actually function best, which is the system of special procedures. The special procedures, for those who aren't schooled in all of the UN technology, basically mean either the special rapporteurs, independent experts, or members of working groups that focus on either thematic or country-specific issues. Right now, there are 31 thematic mandates or special procedures at the Council, and a number of them are really, really terrific mandates. The ones that Freedom House tends to focus on the most are listed here. I would say that most of these mandate holders are really top-notch experts that really function independently. They produce very, very important reports that can be used in our own advocacy efforts to back up the issues that we're talking about. In addition, there are also 8 country-specific mandates. This is a number that is growing smaller all of the time, actually. There used to be more country-specific mandates, and after the first year of the Council finished and what was called the institution building package was agreed upon, in order to keep any country-specific mandates, a compromise was made, and the mandates for Belarus and Cuba specifically were dropped. So these are the mandates that we have left. Four of these country-specific mandates are countries that Freedom House ranks at the very, very bottom. We consider them to be very critical mandates. The Special Rapporteur on North Korea, the independent expert on Sudan that just got renewed to that past resolution, obviously the Burma or Myanmar mandate, and Somalia, another country that I think needs a lot of special scrutiny. But all of these are important mandates. Well, what exactly do these people do, and how can we as civil society engage with them? First and foremost, they research and compile information on human rights abuses in either the country or on the topic that they're focusing on. They take this information and they can send what are called urgent appeals or letters of allegations to particular governments raising these issues, and they can actually conduct country visits to these to countries of special concern. The country visits is sort of an interesting issue because in order to do so, the special procedures require that the country that they want to visit actually issue them an invitation. Some of you may know that there are some countries, I think it's about 65 or 66 now, who have issued what are called standing invitations to the special procedures, which means that anytime any one of the special procedures wants to come to their country, that they've got an open invitation to come, and they've got an open invitation to conduct the country visit how they would like to conduct it. Often what happens is that countries, particularly countries with serious human rights problems, either won't issue an invitation to the special procedure, or they will issue an invitation with so many restrictions and limitations that the mandate holder basically decides it's not worth it to make that visit, that they can't properly conduct that. I don't know if anybody was over at the council earlier today, but they had the interactive dialogue following the report of Manfred Novak, who's the current mandate holder on torture, who's just been terrific. And if you listen to that dialogue, you would hear again and again countries with very poor human rights situations where torture is a problem criticizing the mandate holder and basically trying to make excuses for why either they hadn't issued an invitation or they hadn't issued an invitation with restrictions. Now the mandate holder, of course, in his report, his or her report, can indicate whether or not a country has responded to the request to issue an invitation or whether they've kind of placed these unfair limitations that essentially make the visit useless. And that in and of itself can be an important advocacy tool for civil society organizations working in that country. Another thing that the special procedures do that's really useful for civil society is that they're issuing statements on the topic that they are expert on, and often they're now issuing these statements jointly with other special procedures since many of the mandates overlap one another in terms of their content. These are another really, really important source of documentation and a way that NGOs and other civil society groups can use these statements to increase the impact of their arguments back at home, having these independent experts who have weighed in with a similar argument on an issue that they care about. And then finally, of course, the special procedures report out, both to the council as well as to the General Assembly. And so those reports carry quite a bit of weight, and you can tell by the level of interaction and the level of pushback that they get by particular states that countries actually pay attention to these reports and are very sensitive to the fact that they're being critical. I'm going to just quickly talk about other things that NGOs can do when they're actually here in Geneva and what they can actually do at the Human Rights Council. First of all, of course, in order for an NGO to act independently at the council, they have to have accreditation through ECOSOC. And I should note, for any of you who pick up a copy of our report card, we have a whole section on NGO accreditation and a body that's called the Committee on NGOs, which is based in New York and is made up of 19 governments, and unfortunately is really, really heavily dominated by governments with very poor human rights records, whose vested interest in sitting on the committee is making sure that human rights organizations don't get accredited through ECOSOC, or those that have already gotten accredited in the past get harassed and find it very, very time-consuming and difficult to maintain that accreditation. So if you're an organization that hasn't been accredited or is in the process, oftentimes it can take 3 or 4 years to get through the NGO committee. One of the things that you can do, again, is partner with other organizations that have accredited and get your accreditation through that organization. In fact, one of the main reasons that Freedom House comes to Geneva at least once a year is not so that we ourselves can be here and spread our word and our messages, but so that we can bring human rights defenders from other countries who either don't have the resources or don't have any hope of getting accredited by the NGO committee because their country sits on that committee and doesn't like the work that they're doing and will continue to block their application process. So once you get here, whether through your own accreditation or somebody else's accreditation, there are a number of things, obviously, that NGOs can do. And I will say that Geneva is a much easier, in some ways, advocacy target than New York, in the fact that NGOs really have a fair number of rights and abilities here. They can present written statements in advance of the council session, which go into the written record. They can prepare oral interventions, which are basically short speeches that they can make at different points of the agenda items. And in fact, these opportunities are actually far greater than they used to be under the Commission when the ability to present oral interventions was more limited. They can also convene side panel sessions or little mini conferences during the council session, and all they really have to do is put in a room request. I would say that the process, which used to be quite bureaucratic and tiresome, particularly again for groups that aren't based here in Geneva, this year has been much improved. It's an online request system now, and I can say, at least from our sense, we got our room fairly easily. So you can set up a whole side event where you can bring in experts, you can invite states, you can get press attention and focus on your particular issue. If you're releasing a report or something that's particularly media worthy, of course you can hold press conferences at the council itself. For any of you who don't know, the press offices are located for the most part right in the Palais des Nations itself. You can go there and you can ask them for a list. They prepare an updated little booklet every year of all of the major press that are based in the council with all of their contact information. And I would highly recommend that if you hold a press conference, you obviously not only send out a press release announcing it, but you physically get somebody to run around and knock on the doors of those journalists. Their offices are right there in the Palais, and remind them about it and drag them to your press conference. It's a tremendous opportunity to get your message out. As I already talked about, you can also facilitate the participation of other human rights defenders, of other individuals who either don't have accreditation or maybe they don't have the resources to come to Geneva, which, as you may know, is now the 4th most expensive city in the world. So for most of us who work for non-governmental organizations, it's not easy to get the resources to come to Geneva, even on an annual basis. And then finally, of course, the most important thing you do, going back to my first point, the Human Rights Council is a political body, is you can use the time in Geneva to meet individually with states and press your issues and find out how these countries are planning to vote on particular issues, and let them know that you're watching, that you're paying attention to how they're voting, and that you're going to be hopefully seeing a change in a bad vote or a continuation of a good vote. And that actually makes a big difference. You would be amazed at how many NGOs in their countries have absolutely no idea how their governments are voting in Geneva. And often how their governments are voting in Geneva is very different than what their domestic human rights record is. I want to just stop by mentioning some tremendous resources that are available to civil society organizations. First and foremost is there is an NGO liaison office right within the council system in the Palais des Nations. They are, I think, just terrifically helpful. I think that this year has really been an incredible improvement in terms of everything from making room reservations to getting accreditation now is much easier and online once you've gotten your ECOSOC status. But anyway, they're helpful with almost anything. If you don't know how to do something, if you need an interpreter for something, if you need to know whether or not you're allowed to put out materials in a certain place or whether you're allowed to put up a sign, you can always go to the NGO liaison office, and I found them to be tremendously helpful. Finally, the OHCHR website itself is also terrifically helpful. They have manuals that are posted there. There's an extranet for NGOs where you can often find schedules of things that you can't find on the main Human Rights Council website. And I would highly recommend civil society groups to not only spend their time here meeting with states and meeting with special rapporteurs, but to actually meet within the staff of the OHCHR, because they're the ones who are doing all the work, and they really can be terrific allies to you. Again, even if you can't be here, the fact that all of the council sessions are webcast, you can watch them. You can know what's going on in these debates. You can make videos of these, and you can use those for your own advocacy purposes. There's another organization that many of you may have heard of, the International Service for Human Rights, Geneva-based group whose main mission is to help other NGOs access the human rights system, human rights mechanisms of the UN system. If you are interested in knowing what's going on at a session, but you're not able to send a delegation, the International Service puts out terrific monitor reports, and they're quite good. They're not just a list of what happened, but they actually provide some context and some analysis on why it's significant and what these debates were really about. I found them to be very helpful. Again, if you're not based in Geneva, this type of information is really golden to you. And finally, there are wonderful report cards that different groups put out that really evaluate what's going on at the Council and help you figure out what the different political context is of what's taking place. So groups like the Democracy Coalition Project, UN Watch put out an annual report card looking at the resolutions and describing the context of it. And Freedom House ourselves also put out a report card that can be a tremendous resource. So I will stop there and see if anybody has any questions or comments. There may be groups here who have perhaps even greater experience than we do and have some additional thoughts. So.
Well, my name is Abdul Malik from Mind Freedom Kenya, and the question that I wanted to ask you is about the UPR and the treaty committee bodies. When state parties submit these reports, the UPR reports, it takes about 3 years for them to schedule. Is that right? I mean, doesn't that actually enable the environment for human rights abusers to continue? So what can be done to change that system to make that process a little bit faster so that we can, because I mean, I find it really ridiculous that the United Nations asks for reform in the global south when the UN itself really needs reform. For instance, another thing I wanted to mention is the disability rights. We cannot talk about human rights without disability rights, because most of the human rights violations lead to disabilities. So what is your take on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities? Thank you.
Why don't I actually take a couple of questions if there are some more, and then I'll respond to them in turn. Is there anybody else who has a question right now? Okay.
Can we have your slides somehow by email?
I'd be happy to send that, and I can even post it on the Freedom House website as a resource if that would be useful to people. Sure. Let me address your question. Reforming anything at the UN is a very, very long-term process, and I think one of the things that was discovered in trying to dismantle the Commission and create the Council is, again, be careful what you wish for. A lot of people within the Commission said, yeah, it's true that there are reforms that are desperately needed, but now might not be the best time to push for those reforms because we may end up with something that's actually worse than what we had before. I actually don't think the Council is worse than what we had before under the Commission. However, many of the things that we would have liked to have seen ended up just being impossible. Certainly the frequency with which the UPR reports were going to be done was one issue of debate, and I think everybody would have liked to have seen a shorter window. But I think the reality is, doing a review of 192 countries is a tremendous amount of work. And basically, one of the things that you've seen is essentially the Council is now permanently in session, because it's got the regular sessions, it's got all of the UPR sessions, and then there are special sessions that are being called to address particular issues. So I'm not sure how realistic it would be to push for a shorter window. However, I would say that I don't think that the window is closed when the UPR report is finished or if it's a couple of years leading up to it. I mean, one of the things that actually is positive about the UPR is that there are this series of recommendations, and I think one of the things that all groups can do once their country has been reviewed, regardless of how seriously they took the process, is that they can monitor their performance and put out reports leading up to the next formal UPR session. You don't have to wait 4 years to be doing advocacy on this issue. Yes, the Council is not going to specifically look at them again. I mean, the same problem exists with the treaty bodies, as you said. There, I mean, one of the issues is that, of course, states are often very overdue in even submitting the reports, and obviously there's not a mechanism with the UN of forcing states to write the reports or submit them on time. But again, even those reports can be very helpful, and they provide tremendous opportunities for NGOs to produce shadow reports, to engage with the relevant treaty body committee that's overseeing those reports. So it's not a perfect system. I think that you always have to look at the UN system as something that complements your existing advocacy efforts. It can't replace them in any way.
And the question about the disability rights.
I agree with you. I think it's really critical. And I mean, one of the things that you're seeing is that it takes a long time for the process of states to both ratify, well, to sign and then ratify the major conventions. And then, of course, even when they've done so, most of them don't fully abide by the obligations within those conventions. Nonetheless, I think that, again, just like with the UPR process, you have to look at those as an advocacy opportunity, as a point through which you can guide your efforts. And the fact that a convention exists, whether or not a country has gone through the process of ratifying it, is a huge opportunity for civil society to push their governments to make reforms and to work towards ratifying that. So I agree that it's, we come from, the United States is a country that has not signed on, and in some cases they've signed and then haven't ratified some of the major treaties. And there's a major push right now within the Bush following the Bush administration, within the Obama administration, to try to turn this tide around. It's an extremely time-consuming process. Nonetheless, it provides us an opportunity to focus on the fact that we haven't ratified CEDAW, that we haven't ratified the rights of the child, et cetera, and we just have to use it as an opportunity to do advocacy on those issues. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me just follow up that question with a follow-up question, please.
Okay,
if
quick.
you don't mind. The shadow reports, you said there are other mechanisms within the UN systems that we can use as advocates to push our governments to domesticate these treaties. And one of them is the shadow report or the parallel reports. And what you're saying is that there's a limit of just 5 pages. Can we put an appendix to the 5 pages, which is a little bit longer?
I don't, and maybe somebody else knows this better than I do, I don't believe that the shadow reports for the treaty bodies have to be limited to 5 pages. They do have to be limited to 5 pages, the stakeholder reports for the UPR process. And yes, they do allow you to attach appendices to those reports, although you should note that in terms of the specific citation and content of the report, only that 5 pages of it would be cited in the actual compilation document itself. So again, you have to be really strategic and really think about working collectively with other organizations to make sure that all of the major human rights issues in a country are being covered, because it is absolutely impossible to cover more than 2 or 3 maximum in such a short document, and they also have strict rules about font size and margins and all that kind of stuff, so you can't sort of cheat like you did when you were in college. But you can work within those boundaries.
Thank you very much, Paula. I'm Chris Lamb. I'm from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and thank you very much for all the information you gave. I have to say, if you can forgive me, that I think it's a pity that so much has concentrated itself on the way the Human Rights Council works. You didn't give much time, I don't think, to what happens in the rest of the system. the treaty bodies you just mentioned. There's the Human Rights Committee, the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, the Committee on the Rights of Disabled Persons, the Committee Against Torture. There's a whole range of regional bodies which are supported by treaties. One of the difficulties that many governments have, and I can see this from the Red Cross, but also from where I used to work in the Australian government, is a great overload in reporting that they have to do, very often on the same thing. When it comes to the UPR, which, as was just said, is something which takes a long time to put together, it very often doesn't come for debate until it's old or even out of date. People have lost interest in a lot of the material in the UPR report by the time it gets there, and the supporting information is often not updated. Whereas what goes forward to the other things is not necessarily going to be done any more quickly, but it will be considered as a document which is current, because it will be supported by a report done by a member of the relevant committee on the country's performance, which will include a visit to the country, a meeting with the NGO community, as many meetings as are necessary in the country to go through the issues. Most governments, including the governments that you would regard as low on the scale of freedom or democracy, however your scales are done, do have to have interaction with the non-governmental community before those reports are done. And if they're not done, they'll be quizzed on that by the independent expert members of the committees. And as you said yourself, one of the minuses on the Council is that it doesn't have access to the same sort of expert opinion. I think that the United States gives undue weight to the Human Rights Council as the body that considers these reports, because it's not a member of all of the treaties and doesn't have experience of the way the treaty bodies work. What I would much rather see is much more concentration on advocacy directed at the treaty body, the treaties and their obligations and the way the treaty bodies work. I would regard the Human Rights Council, meeting as we sit here, as an essentially political body that, for the reasons you gave, is not going to do the kinds of things that you're asking for. But the countries that you've mentioned and all the others are given detailed scrutiny by most of the time by the treaty bodies, and that's for me where the action is. It's also true to say that of the regional bodies. They're in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. There's bodies like the Asia-Pacific Forum on Human Rights that many countries take a lot of notice of when they go and do their work, and they're intergovernmental. For me, the Human Rights Council is not the main game on human rights. So my question is, would you like to comment on that, or perhaps there's not enough time?
I'd be happy to comment on it. I partly agree with you. I was asked to actually talk about the council, and then I saw the panel later was named Broader International Advocacy, but unfortunately, like most NGOs, we have a fairly limited amount of time, and we're trying to actually do advocacy over at the council on this same day. I think the treaty bodies are critical. We have board members who sit as members of the Committee on Human Rights that oversees the ICCPR, very good friend who sits on the CAT committee, and Freedom House. One of the things that we do is we try to train human rights defenders in different parts of the world and help them actually write shadow reports for the treaty bodies. I think the work that they do is critical, and in many ways that is the actual international law that exists, of course, is the treaties to which states have actually obligated themselves. I have to say, I think it's a little, it strikes me a little bit funny to say that the U.S. focuses too much on the Human Rights Council, because from the point of view of American civil society organizations, to get the U.S. to focus on anything at the UN outside of the Security Council and the Permanent Five is tricky. So we were actually relieved that the U.S. Even rejoined the Human Rights Council under this administration and was willing to engage again on some of these, on some of the human rights mechanisms. So anyway, I take your point, but my presentation was prepared with what I'd been asked to prepare. So, other questions? If there aren't any other questions specifically on the council, I'm just going to ask my colleague, Balint Molnar, who works out of Freedom House's office in Budapest and does most of our advocacy and outreach towards the European bodies, and he's going to speak just a little bit about outreach towards the European Parliament.
Thanks, Paula. As Paula mentioned, this is going to be a very, very off-the-cuff and very brief sort of little overview of one of the key targets of Freedom House's advocacy in Europe, and that is the European Parliament, which over the last few years has gained tremendous importance in terms of advocacy efforts by various organizations, not only human rights organizations, obviously, but trade organizations and others, because the European Parliament itself has gained a great number of capacities and rights vis-a-vis the other bodies of the European Union. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the EU, and I don't want to launch into a sort of lengthy overview of the various bodies. What's important to know about the European Parliament is this is one part of the legislative branch, if you like, of the European Union. The other one would be the Council of the EU. Currently, the European Parliament consists of 736 members of European Parliament who are elected every 5 years by universal suffrage across Europe in their own countries. The European Parliament does not have one important power. It does not have legislative initiative. It cannot propose legislation to the EU, but in every other aspect, it plays a very, very key role in working with the other bodies of the EU, that being the Council and the Commission, which is the executive branch, if you take the EU as a sort of a proto-government of the European Union, and it does perform a very key role in terms of a counterweight to those other branches, and certainly in recent years it has shown that it has the power to stop or modify various processes within the EU, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. From a human rights perspective, it certainly it usually performs a very important task of quizzing officials, putting issues on the agenda, and trying to push for through a variety of channels to raise awareness on issues and sometimes even push for resolutions. Some of them most of them are non-binding resolutions, but that said, they do send important messages to both the public and the other branches of the EU. Following the Lisbon Treaty, the European Parliament has gained even more powers within the decision-making processes of the EU, particularly now has oversight over the entire EU budget. And as some of you might have noticed in early this year, through the process of when the new Barroso Commission, each Commission member goes through a very rigorous hearing process within the European Parliament, and some of them didn't make it, which means that the Parliament exercises tremendous impact over the composition of the Commission. The case in point being the eventual withdrawal of the Bulgarian nominee, the lady who had some dodgy issues with finances and her husband's relationship to organized crime. What's important to know about the European Parliament is that the Parliament is organized according to parliamentary groups, and these groups consist of members of European Parliament delegates from a variety of member states that usually belong to parties that play on the same side of the ideological divides, the various ideological divides of the European Union. Currently, I would say that the three key groups in the European Parliament today are the EPP, the European People's Party, which is the right of center parliamentary group, the European Socialists and Democrats, which is the S&D group, and the ALDE group, which comprises the European Liberals. And these are usually, for us, Freedom House and some other organizations, most of the time the key interlocutors in our efforts to push for certain resolutions, to try to create committee hearings, or to organize public events within the European Parliament to put certain issues, urgent or not so urgent, on the agenda. The European Parliamentary groups are rather decentralized since they consist of members of European Parliament who who hail from a number of member states. Today, a group of MEPs to be able to form a parliamentary group, they have to be at least 25 of them, and they have to they have to hail from at least 7 different member states. A recent effort by some far-right members of the European Parliament to create a parliamentary group fell through after disagreements and after the withdrawal of some of the would-be members, at which point the number of countries that these MEPs came from fell below 7, so they weren't able to form a group. As with most national parliaments, the most important work in the EP happens in committees. There's currently 20 standing committees, and most of these committees also have either one or more subcommittees. And the one subcommittee that I think is of particular importance to you is the Committee on Human Rights, which is a subcommittee of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. In terms of engagement, I mean, first of all, because it's kind of an informal presentation, I would say that I'm very happy to talk to any of you. I'll be here tomorrow as well. If you're interested in more details, in particular members of the Parliament who are particularly well inclined to cooperate with NGOs and partner with NGOs and are keen on pushing certain issues, human rights issues, within the European Parliament. And of course, because we have been working in partnership with other human rights organizations, I also would be very open to discuss any specific ideas to cooperate on issues that are of importance and are important today. So that's just an invitation to discuss further. In terms of what can be done in the European Parliament, I think some of the basic things that is worth looking at is certainly you can go on the European Parliament's website and then you can find the members of the committees, the members of the subcommittees. You can find their political allegiance as to which of the parliamentary groups they belong to. Of course, that usually means that you will find out which party that they are affiliated with within their country of origin. So if you would certainly, if you find a German member of the European Parliament who is the member of the EPP, the European People's Party, most likely that person would be affiliated with the Christian Democrats in Germany, and so on. The liberals in the ALDE group are usually affiliated with their liberal parties, and the members of the Socials and Democrats, they're usually with the left-wing parties in their home countries. And that also gives you an indication as to what their position might be on a particular issue. That said, it's very, very, I wouldn't say it's very easy, but it's much easier in the European Parliament to create multi-party alliances around a particular issue, especially if it's a human rights issue. And the European Parliament, I would say, is more forward-leaning in its positions regarding human rights concerns than either the Council or the Commission. And in many occasions, the European Parliament can actually put pressure on the Council and the Commission to be a bit bolder and a bit more outspoken in human rights issues than they otherwise would be. And certainly in recent years, that has been the case. So in that sense, the European Parliament within, I would say, and that's a personal opinion, and I'm happy to argue that also in an informal setting, my personal opinion is that within the European framework, the European Parliament is the most promising venue for human rights advocacy. Obviously, it's not the only one, but in terms of accessibility, in terms of the variety of tools that can be used, and in terms of the possibility to engage directly with members of the European Parliament, it is much more accessible, much more forward-leaning, much more progressive body than either the Commission or the Council, both of which tend to be more bureaucratic, a little more isolated, and certainly more cautious politically when it comes to human rights. I think I'm going to conclude with that. And then if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them here. And as I said, I'm happy to discuss any more specific issues or questions whenever.
I have a question. Is it possible to have somebody to practice with Freedom House in order to become able? Are you sitting also in Brussels, or do you go always to several meetings? How can I train people to become able to do this job?
I'm based in Budapest, but I do go to Brussels, quite frequently, and we also have established very close relationships with other organizations, some of whom are based in Brussels. So I'm very happy to share those contacts with you, and they are based permanently in Brussels, so they have much more frequent interface with all the EU bodies. I think, and the question is how do you, you just go and you practice, and first time it's a bit bewildering, but I have to tell you it's a much simpler procedure than the United Nations. So it's
thank you for the encouragement.
Learning curve, yeah. But yeah, I'm happy to give you my contacts and yeah.
Sorry, I figured how this works. I had a question because the lady, she said that there's not always a coherency between the way that countries vote or are within their domestic policies and then their foreign policies. So I wanted to ask, is there some kind of a pattern, or have you noticed some kind of a pattern of European countries and how they behave within the EU and then how they vote within the UN? Like, is there a big difference between how they behave in these two different organs?
I would say for most of the European countries, there's not a tremendous difference, but there's a recent one that's a little bit of an interesting one. I was here in the fall for a meeting, I'm almost embarrassed to say the name of it because it's so long and boring, of the Ad Hoc Committee for the Elaboration of Complementary Standards for the International Covenant on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. So it just rolls, right off the tongue. I was here in the fall for a meeting of that. This is a committee that's been set up to basically try to get the concept of defamation of religions actually into international law. So taking it beyond the non-binding resolutions that have been passed every year, but to actually create an optional protocol to the ICERD that would require states that sign on to the convention to take legal measures to prevent this kind of expression. And there was it was amusing, ironic maybe is the better word, that Ireland, which is a country that has typically tended to vote against those resolutions at the international setting, both in Geneva as well as in New York. That's another issue, is countries don't actually always vote the same in Geneva as they do in New York at the GA either. Ireland actually passed its own defamation of religions law this past year, much to the horror of most human rights organizations. This came on the heels of the United Kingdom finally getting rid of its defamation of religion law after years and years and years of advocacy. Now, that law hadn't been used in a number of years, but it was still on the books, and it was an embarrassment that it had it, so Ireland turned around and passed this law at the same time that at the international level it votes against those resolutions. A lot of the discrepancies, however, come in countries where there aren't as many active civil society organizations who are necessarily watching what's going on. And I would say, it's hard to say if there's a pattern. I think oftentimes the issue is, again, countries don't want to expend political capital angering other countries that they have important relations with on issues that maybe they don't think is going to affect them within their own borders, or maybe that nobody else is really paying attention to. And some of the examples of countries that we criticize in our report cards, countries like Brazil, whose record it's very unpredictable. Sometimes it really votes in a way that we think is the right way and that's promoting human rights, and sometimes it does just the opposite. There, I think, Brazil's a country that just has its own independent foreign policy, but I think sometimes it falls a little bit victim to this idea that there's, a Western concept of human rights or a Northern concept of human rights that's different than a Southern one or a non-Western one. And, I don't buy that argument at all. There's a universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's the whole point. These are universal values. Countries can't opt out of them because either a certain history or a certain cultural preference or so on. So to me, that's a flawed way of looking at it. But unfortunately, I think a lot of countries are kind of swayed by this, and sometimes countries will simply vote against something because a lot of other countries are putting pressure on them to vote that way. So I'll leave it there. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Another question. Both of these organizations or bodies are political in nature. That's how they were formed and that's how they continue. But there seems to be the obvious assumption that the European organization is political, whereas the United Nations is not. And so there's a different emphasis that's placed on the United Nations, a sort of ideological home for the evaluation of human rights, whether it's in treaty bodies or through the special procedures in the Council. I mean, could you maybe just talk a little bit about that, about the fact that these are both political in nature, and how politics from the respective countries plays into the decisions to, appoint, for example, or approve special rapporteurs on torture, or the individuals who evaluate the treaty bodies, beyond the Council?
Well, as has been pointed out, certainly the Council itself is a political body. I mean, one of the positives about the UN system is it actually also has expert bodies in the form of the treaty bodies, although again, even there, in terms of getting committee members elected, sometimes can be a political process. And in particular, again, I would say only people want to make sure that there is diversity. So in many cases, to nominate a candidate either for a mandate holder position on for one of the special rapporteurs. For instance, the torture mandate is actually coming up. Manfred Novak will be finishing up his term. It will be, it will be partly a little bit of a political decision in terms of who replaces him, and very likely it will have to be a non-European, because he is a European, he's Austrian. Evaluating the candidates on their expertise, as opposed to whether or not they're from a part of the world that they think they agree with on certain issues. So the UN has both political bodies, has expert bodies, although I would say that political decisions come into play in all of those, the independent ones. So I don't know if Paula wants to comment on the EU.
I mean, the European Parliament is a explicitly political body, so it's very clear who's affiliated with which political side, if you like. Even though the pan-European parties, which are behind the parliamentary groups, are much more diverse than the individual national parties whose members are eventually delegated to the bodies by the virtue of being elected to the European Parliament. And of course, even as I'm contradicting myself slightly, although I think it's just a qualification. I said that the European Parliament in general is more progressive and more forward-leaning in human rights than the other branches of the European Union, I think for obvious reasons. But of course, there are certain issues that, it's harder to create consensus and a multi-party position because they are more sensitive to one or another member state, and therefore MEPs who hail from that member state, or if a European party is dominated by one of the countries in a certain way, then it's more difficult to get them on board on these issues. That said, MEPs are often act as more independently than they would in their national parliaments. So in those terms, as I said, the European parliamentary groupings are much more decentralized. So very often you can find sympathetic members of European Parliament for issues from the ideological side that you would not expect it to. So that's why it is actually quite useful to have a mapping exercise and to know who the individual MEPs are and who are the ones who can be talked to and who are interested in these issues. And sometimes it's not always the MEPs who sit on the Human Rights Subcommittee. Sometimes it's other MEPs who have a pet issue or something that they are concerned with, and then they can do some behind-the-scenes work, some talking to their fellow MEPs. Who are formally in a position to put issues on the subcommittee's agenda and then push it through. That said, any MEP can actually take on an issue and can create a public hearing and organize a public hearing. So in that sense, there's a great deal of flexibility there, and I think there's much less arcaneness about the process than there is in the UN. It's more transparent in that sense.
All right, well, I think that's it for questions, and Hillel's just let me know that our time is up, so I want to thank everybody for coming. I'm sure it's maybe not the most interesting way you could spend your late evening on a Monday afternoon, so I appreciate it, and I want to welcome all of you to please take a copy of our Human Rights Council report card. It provides a lot of the information that I said here today, and I'll certainly be willing to send my PowerPoint to anybody who wants it and post it, and Ballant as well will be willing to follow up with anybody, so thanks.
I want to thank the panel for their important advice for NGO activists who may be starting or who can benefit from their experience. This concludes our first day of the Geneva Summit. It's been a long day. It's been a fruitful day. It's been an emotional day. I thank you all for your participation. Tomorrow begins at 9 a.m. According to my badge, we begin with censorship and internet freedom, which is an important focus of the summit. Among the people on the panel are Bob Borstein, who's with Google. He's the spokesman in Washington from Google. We're thrilled that he'll be with us here tomorrow, as well as a senior representative from the International Telecommunications Union. At 10:30, we'll have young rights defenders in the blogosphere. At 1:30, free and fair elections, the case study of Iran, with the fiancé of Neda, the young woman who was murdered by the Iranian militia in June. At 3 o'clock, there'll be freedom of expression, key battlegrounds. At 4:30, we'll have a panel on reform of the Human Rights Council with the French ambassador Jean-Baptiste Mattei, Edward Mortimer, and others. And at the conclusion tomorrow, we will announce, the dissidents will announce our declaration on internet freedom. And finally, I want to ask the co-organizing NGOs to remain for a few minutes so we can have a chat. And to all the rest of you, have a very good evening and hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.